The empirical rule. IQ scores have a bell-shaped distribution with a mean of 150 and a standard deviation of 15. So what percentage of IQ scores are between 120 and 165? When we're dealing with the empirical rule, then we have to refer to this graph. Okay, so remember here that if you have the mean, which is in the middle, okay, one standard deviation below the mean would represent 34.13%. One standard deviation above the mean is 34.13%. When you add them together, it's 68% total that's within one standard deviation of the mean. Okay, now if we go a little further, if you want to go 2 standard deviations above the mean, then we're going to take 34.13 and then add 13.59%. And then here 34.13 and add 13.59%. When you add all 4 of those together, that tells us that 95%, when you add those all up, gives us 95%, and that means that that's within 2 standard deviations of the mean. Now if we go a little further, and then from 95 we're going to add the 2.14% and a 2.14% on this side. That's going to give us a total of 99.7% of the data, which is within 3 standard deviations of the mean. And then anything beyond that is 0.13% and 0.13%. So again, we're going to look at the data here. So we have a mean of 150 and a standard deviation of 15. So we want to find out what those values are. So if this is 150, then what we want to be able to do is now find, okay, what's 150 plus 15? Because that's the standard deviation. So if we add 15 here, which is the standard deviation, we get 165. That means it's 1 standard deviation is above the mean. Okay. Now if we add another 15, that's going to be 2 standard deviations above the mean, which gives us 180. And then add another 15 from that, gives us 195, which represents our 3 standard deviations above the mean. Now if we want to go below the mean, that means we're going to subtract 15 from the 150, which gives us 135. And then 2 standard deviations below the mean is subtracting 15 from the 135, which gives us 120. And then 3 standard deviations below the mean, if we take 120 and subtract 15, we get 105. So now we know that 135 and 165 is 68% within 1 standard deviation. 120 and 180 is going to represent 95% within 2 standard deviations. And then between 105 and 195, that's going to represent 99.7% of data that are within 3 standard deviations. But the question is asking us what percentage of IQ scores that are between 120 and 65. So let's go ahead and take a look at that. So we want to be able to find out, okay, what are the values that are between 120. So there's 120. And then there's 165. So it's going to represent everything that is in between those 2 values. Okay, so what is the percentage we need to add up? 13.59%, 34.13%, 34.13%. So let's go ahead and do that on our calculator. So if we take 13.59 plus 34.13 plus 34.13, well, that gives us 81.85%. So therefore, when we add those all up, we get 81.85%. So then we would say that the percentage of IQ scores that are between 120 and 165 would then be 81.85%.